Baruch Hashem. This week's parsha is Parsha Shoftim. So I wanted to go over the laws of the king, which we started discussing last night in our Rashi class. I wanted to first just very briefly read the verses with everybody, explain what the Talmud says about it. And after we go over what the Talmud says about it, we'll see some of the rabbinic interpretations. So this passage is 12:32 p.m. Sorry. This passage begins in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14. Says the verse, Ki tavo haaretz, when you come to the land that Hashem your God gives to you, and you inherit it, and you dwell there, and you say, I will place upon myself a king like all the nations that are around me. So the Jewish people ask for a king. So there's a whole debate whether or not it's a mitzvah or whether it's a commandment or it's permission, whether they're commanded to appoint a king or whether they're allowed to appoint a king. We'll come back to that in a moment. First, I want to read the verses. The verse says, you shall appoint a king. You should appoint a king, and Hashem your God will choose for you. From amongst your brothers you shall appoint a king. You're not allowed to place upon yourself a foreigner as a king. He is not your brother. But the king has limitations. He's not allowed to make too many horses. He's not allowed to bring the people back to Egypt in order to get horses. And Hashem has told you, you're not allowed to return back to Egypt. He's not allowed to have too many wives. That's how many are too many wives? The Talmud says 18. He's not allowed to, because the wives will lead his heart astray. And he's not allowed to have too much gold and silver. So we see he can't bring the people back to Egypt, can't have too many wives, can't have too much gold and silver. He has to be not a foreigner. And next law is that when he sits on his throne, he has to write a Torah scroll for himself in front of and before the Kohanim and the Leviim. So he has to have 2 Torah scrolls. Rashi says. So, and one which he leaves in his palace, and one which he shall take with him, says the verse, read all the days of his life. So he should study, fear Hashem, to watch all the Torah and these laws. And he's not allowed to become arrogant, and he's not allowed to depart right or left from all the laws that were given to him. These are the verses of the Torah about the laws of the king. And now I just want, before we go to some of the rabbinic explanations, I want to just cite some of the Talmudic statements that are taught about it. So first is from many of the laws of the king are found in the second chapter of Tractate Sanhedrin, which is called the Perek Kohen Gadol, which is about the high priest, but it's also about the king. So there were 3 commandments. The Talmud says that there were 3 commandments that Jewish people were given upon entering the land. They had to appoint a king, they had to destroy Amalek, and they had to build a temple. And so the Talmud says explicitly that this is a commandment. But not everybody agrees with it. In the Talmud, there was a debate. Not everyone thought that it was obligatory. Other opinions are that it was optional, as we'll see. So the next passage is, you shall appoint a king, so that so here too, It says, you shall appoint a king. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay, so it says, you shall appoint a king from amongst your brothers. So what does that mean? So the rabbis actually learned from this a larger law, which is very, very controversial law, that you're not allowed to appoint somebody to a position of authority if he was not born a Jew. Meaning to say, like, there's whether or not, for example, a convert can be the head of a synagogue, can be the president of a synagogue, or a rabbi became a major debate. And those who are strict say, learn it from this, from the idea you should point that these are positions of authority. It's not just the king, but any position of authority has to be somebody who was born Jewish. And that's based upon the Jerusalem Talmud and Kedushin, chapter 4, halacha hey, because it says, mikarav achicha, from amongst your brothers. It says the Talmud, I only know a king. How do I know any officer or collector of charity or the judges or the bailiffs of the court, the marshals? Whoever you are appointing upon yourself has to be from the Brurincha Ba'amcha, meaning to say somebody basically who is from the I guess the choicest of your people, which means that he can't come. He cannot be somebody who just joined the community. He has to be somebody who was born that way, and so that's how it became a major debate in America, etc. Because many people in the communities were obviously Jews by choice, and then it became controversial. Hold on one second. Okay, so also it says, the Talmud in Kedushin says, you shall appoint upon yourselves a king. It says Rav Ashi in the tractate in Kedushin 32b, a king that tries to waive his honor. Let's say the king says, listen, call me by my first name. Let's say my name is David, but I'm King David. Don't call me King David, call me Davidal. So no, it doesn't work, because it says Som Tasim Melech, the awe has to be upon you. You're not allowed to appoint. He's not allowed to waive his honor. Melech Shemechal Kvodo En Kvodo Machol. And so therefore, as a consequence, the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin says there's a lot of laws. And by the way, going back to Sheldon's question, it's not the same law even for the king. The king has different laws than everybody else. So therefore, the Talmud says you can't ride on his horse, you can't sit on his chair, you can't use his scepter, you can't look at him when he's getting a haircut, you can't look at him when he's bathing, okay. And the next law, which is controversial, okay, 2 for 2. It says we only started with controversy number 1. Now we're going to say another point, which is unpopular. Som tasim melech melech v'lo malka, that you're allowed to appoint a king, but not a queen upon yourself. This is what some say, that a position of authority should not be granted to a woman. And so that's why some want to say, like, I don't even know if it's the case, like Orthodox Union, whether or not they allow women to be presidents of synagogues. I don't know where they land today. I know for many years they didn't allow it. And this was the source. Where Moshe Feinstein ruled. I mean, the question is, like, what's a position of authority? So that's where it comes down to. Basically, this was one of the arguments people tried to make, that women can't be rabbis, because they said she can't be in a position of authority. Those who countered say, listen, being a rabbi is no authority figure. I mean, he's got to answer to his board. Or she's got to answer to his board, but so her board. So they're not really in a position of authority. So that's why it became a major debate. And this was the source for it. The Talmud in Sota 41a tells us that there was an incident with Agrippus the king, that he was reading the Torah, maybe this Shabbos, many, many years ago. He was sitting there reading the Torah on the Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount, and he was reading the Torah, and he was reading it beautifully, and he came to this verse, It says, you're not allowed to appoint a foreigner. And he says, whoa, 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 whoa. And when he started to read this, he started to cry. The tears are flowing down his eyes during the second temple because he's reading this verse. You can imagine, people got very sensitive. We just said a convert can't be the king, a woman cannot be the king, and we're all getting all upset. Imagine he was the king and he was a foreigner and he started to cry. So Amrulo, they said to him, Al tisyare Agrippus, don't worry, Agrippus. Achinu ata, you're our brother. This verse doesn't apply to you. It applies to others, but not to you. So Rashi explains there that reason why they said that is because really his mother was Jewish. But tricky because the Gemara explains that the Jewish people got in trouble there because they were flattering Agrippus. They were basically making a forgery of the Torah for political purposes. And so Tosos really doesn't like this explanation because if he really was allowed to be the king, then why would they have been punished from it? And so therefore, Tosfos says that even though his mother was Jewish, since this was basically such an important position of authority, he needed to be a pure breed. He needed to have both the mother and the father, something that we don't require at all today, but he needed both. I mean, this is something, obviously, language we don't like to use, but that was just a novel idea that he came up with. So the Torah Tamima gives a different explanation and says, really, Agrippus' mother was not Jewish at all. And the reason why they just said he was his brother means say, you're our brother in spirit. You're our brother in spirit. Means say you like to do the commandments just like us. And really he was disqualified. And they were just flattering him, even though that was not the appropriate behavior to do at that time. They were flattering him. And you see, these are questions that arose then, they arise now. Basically, the extent to which you can, so to speak, alter the message of the Torah for political purposes, for the sake of communal peace. And these are issues that every congregation deals with, every community deals with because of the ongoing struggles. So these are the Maimonides. Maimonides says in Laws of Kings, Maimonides writes that the king is the heart of the entire congregation of Israel. So the king is the heart. So since the king is the heart, it basically it's what's beating. It's the beating task, and so therefore he's responsible to be representative of the whole community. And so for that reason, that's why we have many of these laws, these laws of stringency. The Hasidus, the Hasidic community, views their Rebbe as like a king. This goes back to Bruce's question. That's why if you notice, like the real Chabad, those who are real followers of Chabad, they treated the Lubavitcher Rebbe as like their king. The Lubavitcher Rebbe never left. I mean, left just a few times in his life. Once he became the Rebbe of 770 of Chabad, he went to once or twice. He went to the doctor. That's it, very rarely. And once or twice, he used to go to his father-in-law's grave. And once he went to see the children's camp. And once he went, he drove around to see the children's parade. But he never went. He didn't go to meetings or didn't go out to lunch with important donors. No, he never did anything like that. He was the king. The politicians all came to him. Yeah, and they didn't touch him. It was known that if you were a chassid of the Rebbe, you didn't touch him. He was like the king in that respect. That's how they treated him. So just before we go into the classic rabbinic explanation, we'll just do a couple more Talmudic texts about these verses. It says, not allowed to increase horses. I might think even if he needs it for his chariot. So he's allowed to increase the horses for his army, but not for his personal stable, meaning he can't have just horses just to like collect horses and have like a big stable of horses for no purposes. And how many horses? Each and every one that he has that he doesn't need. Like some people have like many cars or many homes which they have no needs. That would be a direct biblical violation. And the king is not allowed to have too many wives. And the Talmud says that this is an area where the king has more limitations upon himself than a regular human being. A regular commoner, he's allowed to have as many wives as he wants, but the king is limited. The king is limited. The Talmud says explicitly, a regular person, a regular person is technically speaking allowed to, although the Talmud in Tractate Yevamot strongly discourages it. Okay. And also it says about this, he's not allowed to have too many wives because the wives will cause him to go astray. So there's a very powerful Talmudic text here. The very, very powerful Talmudic text. So the Talmud says in Sanhedrin 21, says Rabbi Yitzchak, why does the Torah not tell us all the reasons for the Torah? It doesn't tell us why we're not allowed to eat pork. It doesn't tell us why we have to keep Shabbos. It doesn't tell us why we are not allowed to wear wool and linen together. So says the Gemara, there are two examples where the Torah gives us the reason for the mitzvah, for the commandment, and as a consequence, the greatest of the generation stumbled. It says you're not allowed to have horses so that you don't bring the people back to Egypt. So you can't have, because in Egypt they were horse traders, and you're not allowed to have too many wives so that they don't lead you astray. So King Solomon said to himself, I'll have a lot of horses and I'll be careful not to go back to Egypt. I won't fall in that area. And he says, and I'll have a lot of wives and I'll be careful not to go astray. So about King Solomon, he sinned in both those areas. It says in 1 Kings chapter 10, and his chariot went out from Egypt. And it says, and when Solomon was old, his wives caused him to go astray. So Shlomo HaMelech fell in both of these areas because this is an example of why the Torah doesn't tell us. Solomon was the wisest of all, and he thought he could be smarter than the Torah. The Torah says, don't do it for these reasons. So he says, okay, I just won't do those reasons. But we see that none of us are smarter than the Torah. The Torah tells us not to do something. Well, that's it. We don't do it. We don't try to justify it or come up with reasons. We just have to obey. That's the bottom line. Okay, so it says now the area which I'm very passionate about is the Torah writing. So let's talk a little bit about the king's writing of the Torah. It says he has to write this Mishnah Torah Azos. So it says the Talmud in Sanhedrin 21b, the king should write in his name 2 Torahs. The king has to write 2 Torah scrolls. One that he takes with him wherever he goes, and one that is placed in his palace, that remains for him in his palace. The one that he takes out with him wherever he goes, the Talmud tells us, he's supposed to make it like an amulet and hang it on his arm. So Tosafos writes that some say that this Torah that he carried with him, hold on one second. Some say that this Torah that he carried with him everywhere was not the whole Torah because it's too short, but it was just the 10 commandments. Hold on one second. Did you have a question there? Hold on. that he has to write the two Torahs, but the commentaries say maybe the second Torah that he carries with him at all times, unless they write it really small, that it should really just be maybe the 10 Commandments, because the 10 Commandments, the commentaries say, has 613 letters corresponding to the 613 commandments. So therefore, since the 10 Commandments have 613 letters, maybe that's all that was needed. And he asked, okay. So I might think, since it says he has to write the Mishnah Torah, the Mishnah Torah is a reference to Deuteronomy usually. So I might think, says the Midrash, that he only has to write Deuteronomy. How do we know the whole Torah? So therefore it says Lishmor, it's called Divrei Torah, because he has to guard the Torah. So therefore, why does it say the Mishnah Torah? Means to say, because that's the passage that the king would read every year. When the king would, every 7 years, when the king would gather the people and read to them the Torah, he would read to them from the passage of the Mishnah Torah. I want to say, just before we go on, a very important idea, that the Torah would go out with him, would come with him and go out with him. The phrase Melech Pasadeh, Melech Pasadeh, the king is in the field. Has anybody ever heard that phrase? This is the phrase which the Alter Rebbe, I think, is the one who originated this phrase, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he's the one who said that in the month of El, which we're in now, the parable is God is like a king in the field, that the king comes out into the field and he sees the people, he accepts all their requests, hears all their requests, grants them his favor, and they have a special time where the king goes out from his home, from his palace, which is secluded, and is able to connect to the people with greater ease. So that's what the month of El is. As we get ready for Rosh Hashanah, the king is in the field. God, the whole year is much less accessible for us. But in the month of El, God becomes more accessible. He comes out in the field, are able to connect with him. Where the king is in the field, this is our opportunity to connect. So the king can also be read as a symbolism of God here, that the king goes wherever he goes, the Torah is with him. And then the Talmud in Sanhedrin says in 21b that the king goes out into battle, he takes the Torah with him. When he comes in from battle, he brings it with him. He sits down in court, the Torah is with him. It would be like if to make Avdil Alfei Avdolos, to make 1,001 distinctions, it would be like if the president of the United States, everywhere he went, he had to carry the Constitution. To make it the point that he's beholden to the Constitution. He's not above the Constitution. That's the upshot of this message. So were the king, Barry asked the question, were the king, when they asked Shmuel, the prophet, for a king, were they asking for someone to go out in front of them to battle? And the answer is, that's actually exactly what they said. They said, we want a king to go out before us into battle, to go out to battle before us. So that's exactly what they asked for. Okay, so these are some of the ideas, and I just want to read some of the classical Hasidic ideas about this king, and we have some beautiful ideas here about the king. Hold on one second. There's a lot to choose from, so I don't know how we choose. They're all so beautiful, So first we'll choose from the Chidushei Agados. It says he's not allowed to have, remember we discussed that these are the only two commandments that there's a reason for not doing them. The king can't have too many horses, because then he'll go back to Egypt, and the king cannot have too many wives, because then he will be led astray. So the Chidushei Agados says, why does the Torah give commandments here? Why does the Torah give reasons here? So he explains that there's a fundamental difference, that the reasons for the commandments are actually the commandments themselves. The reasons are not the reasons for the commandments. The reasons are actually the commandments themselves. He shall not cause the people to go back to Egypt, because the Jewish people are actually living in Egypt. And he shall not cause, he shouldn't have too many wives, because then he'll go astray. There's an actual prohibition of going astray. And so therefore the reasons are not really reasons, even though we said an explanation about that before. The reasons are actually commandments. So what about the fact that the king needs two scrolls? Rashi says one he leaves in the palace and the other he takes with him wherever he goes. So why does he need two scrolls? So this is the idea, maybe this is not true anymore, but that the greater the person, the more he has to keep the Torah, the more stringent he has to be. So since the king was in such a position of leadership, he had to doubly keep the Torah. That's why he had to keep the Torah twice as much as everybody else. So therefore he must take upon himself a double yoke of the law of God, a double yoke. And that's why the king had to remain in a bowed position the entire prayer service. The king bowed down the entire prayer service. Everybody else is only allowed to bow down in the first two blessings, and then also the blessing of Modim. But the king had to remain bowed down the entire time to indicate he, more than any other person, and the Jewish people had to accept upon himself the yoke of heaven. So okay, hold on one second. So now we see, hold on one second. Okay. Let's go to this commandment that you shall put a king upon yourself. Som tasimoecha, melach. So here we say, this is the Hasidic rabbis draw a lot of beautiful ideas from these verses, because they understand the king is really giving us great insight also into our relationship with God. There's a lot of beautiful ideas about this that they draw. So one of them is from Reb Tzvi Cohen of Rimanov. I forget exactly how he was related to Reb Elimelech. Maybe he was I know that he was related, of course. So Reb Tzvi Cohen of Rimanov says that, what does it mean you shall appoint the king? The Talmud says that your fear of him shall be upon you. So says Reb Tzvi Cohen of Rimanov, just like the king is not afraid of any man, but only of the King of Kings, so too that fear of him should be upon you. That you should not be afraid of any man other than God. So do you see what the Rimanover does? He says, it says that the fear of the king must be upon you. It doesn't mean that you should fear the king. It means the opposite. It means just like the king has only fear of the King of Kings, so do we must not fear any human being, but we must only be in awe of the King of Kings. That's what the Rimanov says. So that's what it means. What does it mean when it says the Ravshitzer, Som tasim alecha melech, you shall place upon yourself a king. You shall place the king upon yourself. The king upon yourself, meaning to say that you shall have a king upon yourself who rules over your spirit, your actions. And who is this king? This is the King of Kings. These are the ideas that the commentaries just embrace, that these verses on a deeply symbolic level don't refer to a king of flesh and blood, who we know is completely flawed, but really the ultimate king. The Rabbi Yeshua Mikutna asked the question that we've been discussing. So just, even though we've discussed it a little bit, I'll give his explanation. So many ideas that relate to some of the questions we asked. He says, the commentary of the Torah say, well, why did Shmuel get upset if they said, when they said, give us a king? It's a commandment of the Torah. They said, Tenu lanu melech, give us a king. So Rabbi Shua of Kutna says there's a big difference between place a king upon yourself and give, between thema and netina. Thema is basically internal, and tenu, give, is external. Meaning to say, it says about the offering of the certain grain offerings, it says the sin offering, it says you shall not place oil upon it because the oil gets mixed in. But thema is som tasimalecha melech, means to say that the expression of thema, of placing, means to be part of the people, be mixed in. So that was what the king was supposed to be. He's supposed to be one of the people involved in their actions and being a part of their community and lifting them up. But they wanted a monarchy that would be above the people and not part of them. And that was their issue. That was their issue. Another explanation, the most common one, is when they say, we want a king. They said to Shmuel, give us a king so we could be like all of the nations. They didn't want a king to help them do the mitzvos. They wanted to be a king just so they could be like the other nations of the world. Rav Moshe of Kubrin says something beautiful. He says, please, you shall only take a king from amongst your brothers, mikerav achicha. That how shall you appoint a king? Only if he feels like he's amongst the brethren, from love and peace. That's what you should appoint the king, not somebody who feels like he is above you. And when it says, the Ishbitzer Rebbe says, when it says you shall not appoint a foreigner, means to say, that means somebody who has, you should not appoint somebody who has foreign qualities. Somebody like the Hasidim, the great Rebbe's view this symbolically. Don't appoint somebody who's not in control over their emotions to be able to, and he basically has anger coming from him. That's somebody who can't appoint. The Barry asked the question, what about Herod? Because Herod was not from amongst the Jewish people. So he says the Panach Raza that the numerical value of Herod is Nachri, the same word here. You're not allowed to point to Nachri, which is Herod. And that what happened? Herod killed all the rabbis when they told him this, and he only left behind Bava ben Buta. He killed everybody else. Okay. Hold on one second. I'll read this beautiful passage here. Beautiful passage from the Yalkut Margolios. He says a beautiful passage. It says when he sits on the throne, he has to write this Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah really means this double Torah. There's a beautiful teaching about this from the Yalkut Margolios. The Yalkut Margolios says the king of Israel needs to be the leader of the nation. He needs to have in his mind or in himself two qualities. That's what it means, this double Torah. Mishnah Torah literally means a double Torah. What does he have to have? He has to have strength and humility. He has to have zealousness at the same time as friendship, peace and friendship. He needs to have both of these qualities. The king has to have both of these qualities, basically like passion for justice, but compassion. Passion and compassion. So about Pinchas the Zealot says, God says, I'm giving you the covenant of peace. And Pinchas was Elijah. Elijah did not come to distance, but to draw close. And basically, it says when he sits on his throne, he shall write this Mishnah Torah Azos. The leader has to hold within himself this Mishnah Torah, these double qualities, the quality of strength and humility at the same time. That's the concept of the Mishnah Torah. Another explanation is from the Ksav Sofer. What does it mean that he has to have two Torah scrolls, one that's placed in his treasury or his palace and one that he takes with him? So the king of Israel needs that he should have two Torah scrolls, one that's in his treasury, one for himself, and one, meaning to say that he's very careful, very precise, that he doesn't cut any corners. But then he needs another Torah scroll. This is the Torah scroll that he goes out to teach the people with. And there he has to be a little bit more act with a little bit more compassion. The law needs to bend a little bit and to be round and not so straight. And that's that's the two versions of the Torah. One is the internal. Internally, he has to be precise, strong for himself, not cut any corners. But when he rules for the people, he has to have a little bit more flexibility. So generally speaking, we say, says the Alkut Kirshoni, when it comes to regular people, we say Tocho Kaboro. His inside needs to be like his outside. But that's not the king. The king has to have, some say it's the opposite. The king has to have an external aura where he's very honored and elevated. But when he sits in his house, then he needs to be with truly a humble man and understand that his greatness only comes from God. And that's the Torah that's placed in his treasury or in his palace, which is different from the Torah that he goes and teaches to everybody. So V'aisayim karabo, and the Torah needs to be with him, and he needs to read with it at all times. So the Reb Zev of Zaborizhia says, why does it start in the feminine tense, V'aisayim, which is in the feminine, and then it concludes, it shall be with him, and then it concludes in the masculine, and he will read from it. So this is to understand the idea that the Torah has to encompass every aspect of his life. And that's why it's encompassing both the feminine and the masculine. Everything is included in it. The Karabo Kol Yimei Chayav, and the idea is that the Torah scroll he shall read from all the days of his life. So the Chasam Sofer says that the king shall read from the Torah, shall read into the Torah Kol Koros Yimei Chayav. Every time he needs to make a decision, all the things that are going on in his life, he'll find the answer in the Torah. I mean, I just find this passage of the king and the Torah to be one of the most moving passages in the entire Torah, because it's saying that even though there is a king and he seems to have just the most authority, he's subservient to the Torah. And the Torah has to be with him at all times. Torah dominates his life. And so too for our life as well. If the king is to be subservient to the Torah, how much more so everything we do, everywhere we go, every step we take, every breath we make, we have to recognize that our lives are bound by the principles of the Torah. And we can't make up our own Torah. So the king might think he can get away with things, so he has to have two Torahs with him at all times. I had this idea, okay, then I'll tell you this story and then we can stop. I had this idea that since it says the king has to have the Torah with him at all times, I wanted to write a Torah for the president of Israel, that Torah should be with him wherever he goes, that the Torah will be with him wherever he goes. Because it says here, the leader of the society has to have a Torah. So I sent a message, I sent an email to the president's wife, and she said she liked the idea, but they're a little busy now. But maybe one day I'll write a Torah for the president of Israel, wherever he goes, it'll accompany him on his missions, wherever he goes in life, there'll be a Marine there holding the Torah for him. So stay tuned on that one. Okay, we'll stop here if anybody has any questions.